I walked into my own kitchen at 4 in the morning after 15 days away, only to find a stranger wearing my favorite silk robe. She glared at me and demanded coffee. Mistaking me for the new nanny my husband had hired, instead of firing her on the spot, I stared at the heirloom diamond on her finger, smiled, and decided to play along. That was the moment their lives effectively ended. My name is Mira Hartwell, and at 34 years old, I had spent the last decade turning Vanguardian Dynamics from a struggling tech inheritance into a global empire. I was used to walking into boardrooms where men twice my age trembled when I adjusted my glasses. I was used to absolute control, precision, and the cold, hard logic of numbers. But nothing in my 15 years of navigating corporate shark tanks could have prepared me for what I walked into at 4 o'clock in the morning in my own kitchen. I had just returned from a covert trip to Switzerland. It had been 15 days of hell. 15 days of sleeping in conference rooms, drinking stale espresso, and negotiating with Swiss bankers to plug a financial leak that threatened to sink the entire company. I had handled it. Of course, I always handled it. The crisis was averted, the stock prices stabilized, and I had flown back on a private charter, exhausted down to my marrow. My bones felt heavy. My eyes were gritty with jet lag, and my soul felt like it had been scrubbed with sandpaper. The driver had dropped me at the side entrance of the Ironwood estate. I had insisted on it. I did not want to wake my husband. Grant. I imagined him sleeping soundly upstairs, perhaps dreaming of the golf game he had likely played that afternoon. I wanted to be a considerate wife. I wanted to slip in, shower off the grime of international travel, sleep for 3 hours, and then surprise him with breakfast. I looked like a wreck. I was wearing a gray cashmere tracksuit that had seen better days. My hair was pulled back in a messy knot that was slowly unraveling, and I had not worn a stitch of makeup in 24 hours. If the board of directors could see me now, they would not recognize the Iron Lady of Vanguardian Dynamics. They would see a tired woman who just wanted a glass of cold water. I keyed the code into the biometric lock of the side door. The mechanism clicked open with a satisfyingly expensive silence. The house was quiet, breathing softly in the pre-dawn darkness. I left my luggage in the mudroom, kicking off my sneakers. The cool stone floor felt grounding against my stockinged feet. I moved toward the kitchen, navigating by memory. I knew every inch of this estate. I knew the creak of the third floorboard in the hallway. I knew the way the moonlight hit the foyer at 3 in the morning. This was my sanctuary, or so I thought. As I pushed open the swinging door to the kitchen, I stopped dead. The lights were on, not the soft, ambient, under-cabinet lighting I usually preferred, but the full, glaring overheads, and there, standing by the island, was a woman. She was young, painfully young. She looked to be about 24, with the kind of manufactured beauty that thrived on Instagram filters. Her hair was a cascading waterfall of blonde extensions, and her skin was flawless, glowing with the kind of vitality that only comes from never having worked a 16-hour day in your life. But that was not what made the breath hitch in my throat. It was what she was wearing. She was wrapped in my robe, my bespoke, midnight blue silk robe that I had purchased in Milan 3 years ago. It was draped loosely over her frame, the sash tied haphazardly, exposing a generous amount of tanned leg. I stood there, frozen, my hands still resting on the doorframe. My brain, usually a supercomputer capable of processing complex mergers in seconds, stalled. Was this a friend of Grant? A cousin? A squatter? The woman turned. She saw me. Her eyes narrowed instantly. There was no fear, no surprise at being caught in a stranger's house. Instead, her face twisted into a mask of sheer annoyance. She looked me up and down, taking in the messy hair, the baggy sweatpants, the dark circles under my eyes. She sneered. "You are the new help," she asked. Her voice was high, nasal, and dripping with entitlement. "Finally, you are late." I blinked. "Excuse me." She rolled her eyes, slamming a mug down on the marble countertop. "Grant said the agency was sending someone over today, but I expected you here before he woke up. Look at you. You look like you just rolled out of a dumpster." She mistook me for the nanny, or perhaps the housekeeper. Grant had mentioned months ago that he wanted to hire a specialized handler for the dogs we talked about getting, or perhaps extra help for the summer, but to assume I was the help in my own home. "I just arrived," I said, my voice hoarse from disuse. I was testing the waters, trying to understand the geometry of this hallucination. "Obviously," she snapped. She crossed her arms, leaning back against the island. "Well, do not just stand there like a statue. Start making himself useful. Coffee. Set the table. Grant wakes up at 6 o'clock sharp, and he hates delays. If his caffeine is not ready the second his feet hit the floor, you are going to hear about it. And trust me, you do not want to see him angry." My blood began to boil. It started low in my stomach, a familiar heat that usually signaled a hostile takeover attempt. I opened my mouth to eviscerate her. I was about to unleash a verbal tirade that would leave her crying in the fetal position. I was about to tell her that I owned the ground she stood on, the roof over her head, and the very air she was wasting with her vapid commands. "Listen to me, you little—" Then I saw it. She raised her hand to brush a lock of hair behind her ear. The light caught on her ring finger. It was a diamond ring, vintage cut, 3 carats, surrounded by a halo of sapphires, set in platinum. It was my mother's ring. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. That ring was not just jewelry. It was the only thing I had left of my mother. I kept it in a hidden wall safe in the master bedroom, behind a painting of the Amalfi Coast. The combination was something only 2 people knew, me and Grant. Grant had given it to her. The heat in my stomach turned to ice. It froze my lungs, my heart, my veins. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a guest. This was an invasion. Grant had not just cheated on me. He had violated the sanctity of my history. He had taken the most precious heirloom I possessed and draped it on the finger of this child. This rude, arrogant creature standing in my kitchen demanding coffee. If I screamed now, if I threw her out, the game would be over too quickly. Grant would come downstairs, apologize, make up lies, and try to salvage the situation. He would claim it was a lapse in judgment. He would beg. No, that was not enough. I needed to know everything. I needed to know how deep the rot went. I needed to know what they were planning, and the only way to do that was to become exactly what she thought I was. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of her perfume, something floral and cloying that lingered in the air and forced the corners of my mouth upward. It was an industrial smile. Cold, mechanical, and entirely devoid of warmth. "Yes, ma'am," I said. My voice was steady. "I apologize. The traffic coming in was terrible. I will get started right away." The woman, Alara, I assumed, though I did not know her name yet, snorted. "Good. And try to make yourself presentable later. We have standards here at Ironwood." "Of course," I replied, lowering my head to hide the murderous glint in my eyes. I moved to the coffee machine. It was a high-end Italian model, complex enough that most people needed a manual to operate it. I used it every day. I began to grind the beans, the noise filling the tense silence of the kitchen. "Is he awake yet?" I asked, keeping my back to her. "No," she said, picking up her phone. "He was up late working, or that is what he told me. Probably just playing video games." She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. I focused on the water tank. I filled it with steady hands. "He works very hard," I said, fishing for information. "Please," she scoffed. "Grant hard work. The man is a figurehead. He thinks he runs Vanguardian, but everyone knows he is just waiting for his wife to drop dead so he can cash out." My hand slipped on the filter, spilling a few grounds. I paused, then brushed them away. "His wife?" I asked innocently. "The old witch," Alara said, tapping furiously on her screen. "Mira. She is off in Europe somewhere, pretending to be important. Grant says she is practically senile. 34 going on 80. Frigid. Controlling. Obsessive. Honestly, I do not know how he put up with her for this long." I felt a vein throb in my temple. Senile, frigid. I had single-handedly restructured the Asian division while Grant was trying to figure out how to use the photocopier. "That sounds terrible," I murmured. "It is over soon. Anyway, she said, and her tone shifted from annoyed to conspiratorial. She lifted her phone to her ear. Hey, babe. No, I am up. Just dealing with the new help. Yeah, she is here. Looks like a disaster. But she knows how to work a coffee pot. She paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. I strained my ears, the coffee machine gurgling as it began to brew. I know, she said into the phone. Grant promised. He is meeting with the lawyers today. He is serving her papers as soon as she gets back. He is going to claim she is mentally unstable. Apparently, the stress of the company finally cracked her. He is going to get power of attorney, dump her in a facility, and then, bingo. She laughed again. Yeah, the house, the money, everything. He said this place is going to be mine by Christmas. I am already thinking of redoing the kitchen. It is so sterile. I want pink marble. Pink marble in my kitchen. I gripped the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. The audacity was breathtaking. It was not just an affair, it was a coup. Grant Sterling, the man I had elevated from a mid-level manager to a CEO, the man I had supported, the man I had trusted, was plotting to have me committed. He was planning to steal my company, my home, and my life, and hand it all over to this woman who wanted pink marble countertops. Coffee is ready, ma'am, I said, turning around. I placed the mug on a silver tray. I added the cream and sugar exactly the way Grant liked it, 2 lumps. Heavy cream, because a good servant knows her master's preferences. Elara looked at the tray and sneered. Finally, bring it upstairs, but do not go in the room. Just leave it outside the door. If you wake him up before the alarm, you are fired. Understood, I said. And then come back down and clean this floor, she added, gesturing vaguely to the spotless tiles. It feels gritty. Yes, ma'am, I said again. She turned and sauntered out of the kitchen, her hips swaying, my silk robe trailing behind her like a royal train. She looked at the ceiling as if measuring it for chandeliers. I stood alone in the kitchen. The silence returned, but the peace was gone. I looked down at the coffee pot. The steam rose in twisting gray ribbons. I could have gone upstairs right then. I could have kicked the door open, dragged Grant out of bed by his hair, and thrown them both out onto the gravel driveway. I could have called my security team, my lawyers, and the police. I had the power to end this in 5 minutes. But 5 minutes was not enough. 5 minutes of screaming would not pay for the betrayal. It would not pay for the ring on her finger. It would not pay for the plan to lock me away in a mental institution. Grant wanted to play games. Grant wanted to pretend he was the master of Ironwood Fine. I would let him play. I picked up the tray. My reflection caught in the silver surface, tired, pale, unkempt, but behind the exhaustion, my eyes were sharp. They were the eyes of a predator who had just realized she was locked in a cage with prey that had no idea she was awake. I would serve them. I would smile. I would fold their laundry and scrub their floors. I would become the invisible ghost in my own machine. And while they slept, while they plotted, while they laughed at the stupid old wife, I would be watching. I would be recording. I would be dismantling their lives brick by brick, dollar by dollar, secret by secret. I was not going to evict them, not yet. I was going to keep them. I was going to fatten them up on their own arrogance, and when the moment was right, I was going to slaughter them. I lifted the tray and headed for the stairs. The service stairs. Let the show begin. I pulled a surgical mask from the emergency kit in the mudroom and hooked the loops behind my ears. I told myself it was for their protection. A courteous gesture from a sick employee, but in reality, it was the only barrier keeping my identity and my rage contained. I messed up my hair even further, pulling strands loose to cover my forehead and the sides of my face, transforming the polished CEO of Vanguardian Dynamics into a disheveled, sickly phantom. I was no longer Mira Hartwell. I was Clara, the help. Grant did not come down to the kitchen immediately. I heard his heavy footsteps pacing the floor of his home office on the 2nd level. That room was soundproofed, a modification I had paid for myself to conduct late-night international calls without disturbing the household. but Grant had a bad habit of leaving the heavy oak door slightly ajar. He liked the idea of his voice carrying, of his authority bleeding into the hallway. I placed the fresh coffee pot on a serving tray, along with a single white porcelain cup. My hands were steady, frighteningly so. I climbed the service stairs, the ones hidden behind the pantry, moving silent as a shadow. When I reached the landing outside the office, I paused. Grant was speaking. He was not just talking. He was arguing. His voice pitched in that desperate, aggressive tone he used when he was cornered but trying to sound dominant. I leaned closer, pressing my back against the wainscoting. "I do not care about the compliance regulations. Stevens," Grant barked, "just move the assets. We are talking about $5 million from the primary trust. Yes, the Hartwell family trusts. No, she will not notice. She is in the Alps, probably freezing her brain cells off." I gripped the handle of the tray. $5 million. He was trying to liquidate my personal liquidity. "Listen to me," Grant continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss that was somehow louder than his shouting. "Route it through the shell company in the Cayman Islands. We are labeling it as consulting fees for Project Eclipse. Yes, Eclipse. It is the perfect cover. Vanguardian Dynamics has dozens of R&D projects that go nowhere. If the auditors ask, it was a failed software initiative. Just wash the money and get it into my private account by Friday." Project Eclipse. I filed that name away in the steel trap of my memory. It was not a real project. It was a drain. A hole he had dug in the hull of my company to siphon out its lifeblood. I knocked on the doorframe, a soft, tentative rap. "Hold on," Grant said to the video screen. He spun his chair around. "What enter?" I walked in, keeping my head bowed low, my shoulders hunched. I coughed, a dry hacking sound that I had practiced in the mirror downstairs. "Coffee, sir," I rasped, my voice artificially deepened and muffled by the blue mask. Grant did not even look at my face. His eyes barely flickered over my body before returning to his computer screen. To him, I was furniture. I was a vending machine that had just dispensed caffeine. "Put it on the coaster. Do not spill it on the documents." He dismissed me with a wave of his hand. I approached the desk, my desk. The mahogany surface where I had signed the merger with Texol 2 years ago was now littered with Grant's golf scorecards and half-eaten protein bars. I set the cup down, as I did. My eyes scanned the screen of his tablet. He was on a call with Marcus Stevens, a slippery lawyer I had retained for minor contract disputes. I made a mental note to disbar Stevens before the month was over. "And Stevens," Grant said, ignoring my presence completely as he took a sip of the coffee, "make sure the paperwork for the power of attorney is drafted. If I am going to commit to her, I need full control over her voting shares." "It is tricky, Grant," Stevens' tinny voice replied from the speaker. "Proving incompetence is hard without a doctor's evaluation." "I have a doctor," Grant sneered. "I have a guy who owes me a favor. He will sign whatever I put in front of him. Mira is unstable. Everyone knows it. She has been seeing things, hearing voices. The stress broke her." I stood there, freezing in the center of the room. I was holding the empty tray against my chest like a shield. Unstable. Hearing voices. This was his narrative. He was not just stealing my money. He was dismantling my sanity. "Get out," Grant snapped at me, suddenly realizing I was still hovering. "Why are you still standing there? Go make yourself useful." "Sorry, sir," I mumbled, backing out of the room. I closed the door and leaned against the wall in the hallway, my heart hammering a cold, rhythmic beat against my ribs. He was going to try to institutionalize me. The sheer scale of his betrayal was almost impressive. I did not have time to process the hurt. Hurt was a luxury for people who were not at war. I went downstairs, bypassing the kitchen and heading for the laundry room. Elara had left a pile of clothes by the hamper with a note written on a napkin. "Hand wash only. Do not ruin these like the last girl." I looked at the pile. It was my lingerie. My stomach churned. There lay my La Perla silk set, the emerald green lace bodysuit I had bought for my anniversary last year, an anniversary Grant had forgotten. She had been wearing it. The fabric was crumpled, tossed aside with careless disregard. I picked up the garment. It smelled of her cheap, floral perfume and Grant's cologne. The violation felt physical, like a slap across the face. She had rummaged through my drawers, touched my most intimate possessions, and claimed them as spoils of war. "You missed a spot," a voice chirped from the doorway. I jumped, dropping the silk into the sink. Alara was standing there, leaning against the doorframe, holding a green smoothie. She was wearing another one of my robes, this one a white terry cloth spa robe. "The lace," she pointed to a manicured finger. "Be gentle with it. That is expensive. Grant bought it for me in Paris." I stared at the water running from the faucet. Grant had never been to Paris with her. I bought this in New York. The lies he told her were almost as pathetic as the lies he told me. "Yes, ma'am," I said, turning on the cold water. "I will be careful." "And when you are done," Alara took a loud slurp of her smoothie, "go check the master bedroom. I think I left my earring on the nightstand. And do not touch anything else. The safe is off limits." I froze. "The safe?" "Yeah, the wall is safe," she laughed, rolling her eyes. "Grant forgot the combination. The idiot. We tried his birthday. His mom's birthday. Nothing opens it. He says the old hag probably changed it to something obscure just to annoy him. We need to find the deed to the house. He wants to put my name on it before the wedding." She walked away, leaving me with the running water. So, they had tried to crack the safe. I smiled beneath my mask. Of course, they used birthdays. Grant was a simple man. He would never guess the combination because it was the date we first met. He had forgotten that date years ago. I washed the lingerie. I scrubbed it with a ferocity that threatened to tear the delicate lace, imagining I was scrubbing their influence off my life. Then, I hung it to dry and made my way to the master bedroom. The room was a disaster. Clothes were strewn everywhere. My vanity table was cluttered with her makeup products, but I went straight to the painting of the Amalfi Coast. I shifted it slightly. The digital keypad was smeared with fingerprints where they had desperately mashed buttons. I wiped it clean with the hem of my oversized t-shirt. I did not open it. I knew the deed was safe, but the fact that they were actively hunting for it meant the timeline was accelerating. I needed eyes and ears everywhere. I went back down to the kitchen. It was breakfast time. Grant was sitting at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone. A plate of scrambled eggs sat untouched before him. He looked up as I entered, his eyes glazing over me. "More coffee," he demanded, holding out his cup without looking. "Yes, sir," I said. As I poured, he set his phone down on the table, face up. He stood up and walked over to the window, stretching his arms. "Alara, hurry up. We are going to be late for the club." "I am coming. Stop yelling," she yelled back from the foyer. This was my chance. Grant was looking out the window, watching the gardener trim the hedges. His back was to me. I had maybe 10 seconds. I pulled a small flash drive from my pocket, a tool I always carried in my travel bag. It was loaded with a proprietary surveillance rootkit developed by my own security team at Vanguardian. I plugged it into the charging port of his phone. The screen lit up. "Install." Come on. "Is the car ready?" Grant asked, turning his head slightly to the side. I froze, blocking his view of the phone with my body as I wiped the counter. "I believe the driver is waiting out front, sir." He turned back to the window. Good. The progress bar on the screen hit 100%. The icon vanished. Burying itself deep in the operating system, it would record keystrokes, calls, location data, and room audio, transmitting everything to my secure cloud server. I yanked the drive out and slipped it back into my pocket just as Grant turned around. He walked back to the table and grabbed the phone. He frowned, looking at the screen. "Weird. It feels warm." My heart stopped. "Probably the battery," he muttered, shoving it into his pocket. "This piece of junk. I need an upgrade." I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. "This coffee tastes burnt," he complained, taking a sip and grimacing. God, can't anyone in this house do anything right? Where is the old cook? Where is... what was her name? Mrs. Gable? She retired. Grant, Alara said, walking into the room. She was dressed in a tennis outfit that cost more than most people's cars. This is Clara. The agency sent her. Grant looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. He squinted. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a biological alarm bell ringing in the back of his lizard brain. He knew my posture. He knew the shape of my hands. Clara, he said slowly, have we met? Panic spiked in my chest. I had to do something. I had to break the connection. I used to work for the Hendersons down the street, I improvised, dropping my voice even lower, adding a rough, uneducated cadence. Maybe you saw me taking out the trash. Hendersons, Grant muttered. Right, the ones with the annoying poodle. He seemed to buy it, but he was still staring. I turned away abruptly to put the coffee pot back on the warmer, and in my haste, I bumped my hip against the corner of the island. Damn it, I hissed. It was a reflex, a sharp, articulate curse that I used in boardrooms. Grant froze. What did you say? The air left the room, that intonation, that specific way I clipped the T at the end of the curse. It was a signature. He took a step toward me. Say that again. Alara looked up from her phone. Grant, leave the help alone. We are late. She sounded like... Grant trailed off, his eyes narrowing. I gripped the counter. I was trapped. If I spoke, he would know. If I stayed silent, he would get suspicious. Suddenly, the industrial blender on the counter next to me roared to life. Alara had hit the button. I want another smoothie to go, she announced loudly over the deafening noise of blades crushing ice. Clara smoothie now. The noise was a physical wall between us. Grant winced at the sound. The moment of recognition shattered by the chaotic grinding of frozen strawberries. He shook his head, as if shaking off a ghost. Whatever, he yelled over the noise. Let's go. He grabbed his keys and stormed out. Alara followed him, pausing only to yell at me. Do not forget to clean the gym. When the front door slammed, I turned off the blender. The silence that rushed back into the kitchen was heavy. My hands were shaking. That was too close, far too close. I needed to slow him down. He was moving too fast, thinking too clearly. If his paranoia was already this high, he might stumble upon the truth before I was ready to drop the guillotine. I walked to the pantry where the medicine cabinet was kept. Grant was a hypochondriac. He took a cocktail of vitamins every morning, omega-3s, magnesium, and a specialized energy blend he bought from some overpriced wellness guru. I took the bottle labeled High Performance Energy Complex. I emptied the orange capsules onto the counter. Then, I reached into my own travel bag, the bag I had hidden in the utility closet. I took out a bottle of herbal sleep aids I used for jet lag. They were organic, mild, but effective, and they looked almost identical to his energy pills. I filled his bottle with the sedatives. Starting tomorrow, Grant Sterling would not be the sharp, aggressive shark he thought he was. He would be sluggish, foggy, compliant. He would make mistakes in his meetings. He would slur his words during his calls. He would attribute it to stress, to burnout, maybe even to the guilt he suppressed. But I would know the truth. I capped the bottle and placed it back on the shelf, right next to the box of Earl Grey tea. Sleep tight, darling, I whispered to the empty room. I pulled out my phone, my real phone, and opened the surveillance app. The audio feed from Grant's pocket crackled to life in my earpiece. She is creepy. Grant, why does she wear that mask? Alara's voice came through, tinny but clear. Who cares? Grant's voice replied, followed by the sound of a car engine starting. She is cheap labor. Once I get Mira's signature on the power of attorney, we will fire everyone and hire a full staff. Just wait, baby. A few more days and the kingdom is ours. I adjusted my mask, picked up the mop, and started cleaning the floor. A few more days, I repeated. Make them count, Grant. The art of psychological warfare is not about loud explosions or dramatic confrontations. It is about erosion. It is about taking the solid ground beneath your enemy's feet and turning it into quicksand. grain by single grain, until they are suffocating without knowing why. In psychology, they call it the gray rock method, becoming as uninteresting, unresponsive, and impenetrable as a rock while an abusive personality rages against you. I adopted this persona for Clara, the dull, sickly maid, but behind the mask, I was the architect of their living nightmare. Ironwood Estate was not just a house, it was a fortress of technology. I had personally overseen the installation of the Vanguardian smart home system 3 years ago. It was voice-activated, biometric secured, and fully integrated. Grant, in his infinite laziness, had never bothered to learn the administrative overrides. He just knew how to tell the lights to turn on. I, however, had the master key code memorized. At 2 o'clock in the morning, while lying on the uncomfortable cot in the servants' quarters, I pulled out my tablet. The blue light illuminated my face as I accessed the environmental controls for the master suite. I tapped the screen. Temperature 68 degrees. I slid the bar down. Temperature 50 degrees. Then, I accessed the multi-room audio system. I selected a track from a horror movie soundtrack, a low, guttural sub-bass frequency that was barely audible to the human ear, but caused an intense feeling of dread and anxiety. I set it to play on a random loop in the master bedroom speakers at irregular intervals. I lay back and waited. 20 minutes later, I heard the faint sound of shouting from the floor above. "It is freezing here, Grant. Fix it." Alara's voice echoed through the vents. "I am trying," Grant roared back, his voice thick with the sedatives I had fed him earlier. "The damn thermostat is stuck." I watched the data stream on my tablet. Grant was mashing the manual buttons on the wall unit, but I had locked out local control. To him, the system just appeared broken. The next morning, the kitchen atmosphere was toxic. Grant sat at the table, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, shivering, his eyes bloodshot and heavy. The sedatives were doing their work. His movements were sluggish, his reaction time-delayed. Alara looked even worse. She had clearly not slept. "You," Alara pointed a manicured nail at me as I scrubbed the counter. "Did you touch the thermostat yesterday?" I paused, looking up with wide, vacant eyes behind my mask. "The thermo what?" "Ma'am, I do not touch the machines. I only know how to use the vacuum." "Useless," she hissed. "The house is haunted. I heard noises all night, low humming, like someone breathing in the walls." "Do not be stupid," Grant snapped, rubbing his temples. "It is just the wind, or the pipes. You are paranoid." "I am not paranoid. Grant, it was freezing and look at this." She shoved her face toward him. "My skin is breaking out. I feel like ants are crawling on me." I turned away to hide my smile. Earlier that morning, while Alara was in the shower, I slipped into the bathroom. I found her jar of La Mer moisturizer, which was actually my jar that she had stolen from my supply, and I had stirred in a generous amount of dried stinging nettle extract I had harvested from the garden perimeter. It was organic, invisible, and relentlessly irritating. "It is probably just stress." Grant dismissed her, taking a sip of the coffee I had spiked with another dose of his energy pills. "Stop whining. I have a board meeting at noon. I need to focus." "My face itches," she shrieked, scratching at her cheek. "And you are useless. You said you would fire her and get a real staff." "Shut up." Grant slammed his hand on the table. I continued to wipe the counter, moving with the slow, rhythmic motion of a gray rock. I was there, but I was not there. I was a non-entity, absorbing their anger and giving them nothing back, forcing them to turn on each other. "Lunch, sir?" I asked softly. "Just soup," Grant grunted. "Something light. My stomach feels weird." "Yes, sir. I will make vegetable pottage." I knew Grant's medical file better than he did. He had a mild, non-life-threatening allergy to shellfish. It would not kill him, but it would cause significant swelling of the soft tissues in his face and throat if he ingested enough of it. I prepared vegetable soup. It smelled delicious, full of fresh herbs and cream. Then, I reached into the back of the pantry and found a bottle of concentrated shrimp paste, used for Thai curries. I stirred a tablespoon into his bowl. The strong flavor of the vegetable stock masked the fishy undertone perfectly. I served it to him at 11 o'clock. He ate it quickly, too distracted by his emails to taste the difference. 10 minutes later, as he was tying his tie in the hallway mirror, the reaction began. "What the hell?" Grant mumbled, touching his lip. I watched from the shadows of the dining room. His upper lip was beginning to puff out. His eyelids were drooping, swelling with fluid. Within 5 minutes, he looked like he had gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight boxer. His handsome, arrogant face was distorted into a grotesque, puffy mask. "Elara!" he screamed, his voice garbled. "My face! Look at my face!" Elara ran into the hallway and gasped. "Oh my God, you look hideous." "I have a meeting." Grant panicked, grabbing his throat. "I cannot go in like this. The board. They will think I am sick. They are already looking for a reason to oust me." "You cannot go," Elara said, backing away as if his swelling was contagious. "You look like a monster." Grant threw his briefcase against the wall. "Call Stevens. Tell him to cancel. Tell him I have a family emergency. Tell him anything." He stormed upstairs to find antihistamines, leaving his phone and laptop unguarded on the console table for a fleeting moment. That was the opening I needed. I walked past the console table with a feather duster. In one fluid motion, I swiped his phone. I retreated to the laundry room, locking the door. I accessed his email account. I did not send a message as Grant. I logged out of his account and logged into my own corporate account, the one everyone thought was dormant while I was traveling. I drafted a priority email to the board of directors of Vanguardian Dynamics. Subject: emergency shareholder meeting. CEO absence. Dear board members, due to an unforeseen medical incapacity of Mr. Sterling, and concerning financial irregularities that have come to my attention during my remote audit, I am calling an emergency extraordinary general meeting of the shareholders for tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I will be attending virtually to present my findings. Regards, Mira Hartwell, Chairwoman. I hit send. The seed was planted. By the time Grant's face deflated, he would have no company left to run. I returned the phone to the table before he came back downstairs. The rest of the afternoon was a symphony of chaos. Grant was doped up on Benadryl and my sedatives, passing in and out of consciousness on the living room sofa. Elara was pacing, scratching her face, and growing increasingly agitated about her insecurity. "You promised," Elara shouted at Grant, who was lying with an ice pack on his eyes. "You said the house would be in my name by Friday. We cannot plan a wedding if I do not have security." "Grant, what if she comes back? What if she kicks us out?" "She is not coming back," Grant slurred. "She is crazy. She is probably wandering around the Alps talking to goats." "Then sign the transfer," Elara demanded. "If you love me, you will secure my future, unless you are just using me." Grant laughed, a cruel, drug-fueled sound. "Using you, baby. Look at yourself. You are a model. You are arm candy. Of course I'm using you. I need a pretty face on the magazine covers to distract people while I move the money. Do you think I want to marry you for your intellect? You cannot even spell prenup." I was standing in the next room, behind the slightly open door, with my phone recording every word. You bastard," Elara whispered. "I am a businessman," Grant muttered, closing his swollen eyes. "Now shut up and get me some water. My throat itches." Elara stormed out. Sobbing, she ran past me, blind with rage, and slammed the door to the guest room. Grant fell asleep within minutes. The house was quiet. It was time for the next move. I went to the library. The Ironwood Library was a masterpiece of dark oak and leather, filled with first editions I had collected over a lifetime. Grant never entered this room. He preferred his screens. I walked to the section on maritime history. I pulled the copy of Moby Dick. The bookcase clicked and swung inward silently, revealing a narrow passageway. This was the entrance to my private study, a panic room of sorts, fully soundproofed and separate from the rest of the house's ventilation system. Grant knew it existed, but he had never been able to find the entrance. He thought it was just a sealed-off architectural quirk. I stepped inside and turned on the lights. The air was stale. I sat at my primary terminal, a standalone server that was not connected to the house Wi-Fi. I connected the flash drive I had used to bug Grant's phone. The data poured onto my screen. I opened the folder labeled Project Eclipse. It was worse than I thought. It was not just embezzlement. I scrolled through the documents, promissory notes, wire transfers to offshore accounts in Panama and Cyprus, and then I found the emails from a user named Viper. Mr. Sterling, the interest on your debt is compounding. 40% weekly. Our partners are getting impatient. If you do not have the $3 million by the end of the month, we will take payment in assets, physical assets. Gambling. Grant had been gambling on illegal high-stakes cryptocurrency futures and losing spectacularly. He owed money to the syndicate. I read further, to cover the debt. Grant was in advanced talks to sell the proprietary battery technology of Vanguardian Dynamics, my life's work, to our biggest competitor, Apex Corp. For pennies on the dollar, he was going to gut the company to save his own skin. Over my dead body, I whispered. I copied everything, every email, every bank statement, every threat from the mob. I backed it up to 3 separate secure cloud servers and a physical drive. I checked the time. It was 8 o'clock in the evening. I needed to fracture their alliance permanently. Grant had already done the heavy lifting with his arm candy comment, but I needed to drive the nail home. I used a burner phone service on my computer to generate a text message. I attached a screenshot of one of Grant's bank statements, the one showing a balance of negative $200,000 in his personal checking account. I typed the message, "He is not as rich as you think. Ask him about the Viper debt. You are fighting for a sinking ship. Honey." I sent it to Alara's number. Upstairs, in the guest room, I heard a phone ping. I exited the secret room, closing the bookcase behind me. I walked back to the kitchen, took off my mask for a brief moment to breathe the cool air, and then put it back on. I heard footsteps running down the stairs. Not Grant's heavy tread, but Alara's frantic clicking heels. She burst into the living room where Grant was snoring. "Grant," she screamed, shaking him awake. "Who is Viper? What is this?" I stood in the shadows of the hallway, a ghost in my own home, listening to the sound of my enemies tearing each other apart. The first act was over. The foundation was cracked. Now, it was time to bring the whole house down. "Clara," I whispered to myself, "you are doing a wonderful job." I slipped into the server room in the basement, the hum of the cooling fans providing a comforting white noise. This was the nerve center of the house, a place Grant avoided because the blinking lights and whirring drives intimidated him. I pulled out my secure satellite phone and dialed a number that only 3 people in the world knew. "David," I said the moment the line clicked open. "Status report." "Mira." David's voice was crisp, professional, and tinged with relief. He was my executive assistant, my right hand, and the only person at Vanguardian who knew I wasn't actually wandering the Swiss Alps looking for enlightenment. "I was about to call you. The forensic accounting team just finished the audit on the property deeds." "And," I asked, leaning against the server rack, "it is confirmed. Grant forged your signature on a second mortgage application for the Ironwood estate. He used a digital overlay from an old contract. It is a sloppy job, but it was enough to fool the automated underwriting system at First National. He pulled out $2 million in equity last Tuesday." I closed my eyes. He had mortgaged my sanctuary. The audacity was breathtaking. "Secure the evidence, David," I commanded. "I want the digital trail, the IP address of the submission, and the timestamp. Do not flag it with the bank yet. We let him think the money is safe." "Understood. What about his personal accounts?" "Freeze them," I said, my voice cold. "Initiate a silent liquidity lock on his checking, savings, and his Cayman shell accounts. Use the Patriot Act protocols, flag it as suspicious international activity, so the bank locks it down for investigation without notifying him immediately. But, David..." "Yes?" "Leave his credit card active, the platinum one. but lower the limit to $5,000. Just enough for him to buy dinner, but not enough to book a flight out of the country. I want him to feel a pinch, not a heart attack, not yet. Consider it done. And Mira? Yes. Be careful, if he gets desperate. He is already desperate. David, that is exactly where I want him. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my hidden pocket. I went back upstairs. The atmosphere in the house was thick with tension. Alara was in the living room, pacing back and forth. She had clearly taken my anonymous text message to heart. She looked like a cornered animal calculating, fearful, and looking for an exit. "You, Clara," she shouted when she saw me. "The floor here is filthy. There are scuff marks everywhere. Get down on your knees and scrub it. And I mean scrub it. No mops." "Yes, ma'am," I mumbled, dropping to my knees with a bucket of soapy water and a rag. I began to scrub the hardwood floor, moving in slow, deliberate circles. Alara ignored me, assuming I was nothing more than a mindless drone. She pulled out her phone and started typing furiously. I scrubbed closer to where she was standing. I positioned myself at an angle where the reflection in the glass cabinet door gave me a clear view of her screen. She was texting a contact named Baby Bear. "Alara. He is broke. Mike, I think he is drowning in debt. The prenup talks are stalling. Baby Bear. I told you he was a flake. Come back to the city. I have a table at Nobu tonight. Alara. I need to be sure first. If I leave now, I get nothing. I need to find his stash, but keep your phone on. I might need a ride tonight." I smirked behind my mask. Baby Bear. A backup plan. Alara was not in love. She was in business, and business was bad. I reached into my pocket and, shielding the motion with my body, snapped a high-resolution photo of her phone screen using the camera embedded in my smartwatch. The image was crisp, proof of infidelity, proof of conspiracy. Just then, Grant stormed into the room. His face was less swollen than yesterday, but his complexion was pale and sweaty. He was staring at his phone with a look of pure horror. "What is this?" he screamed at the screen. "Technical difficulty. What do you mean, access denied?" He had tried to transfer money. My liquidity lock had just kicked in. "What is wrong?" Alara asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Nothing," Grant yelled. "Just, the bank's app is down. Stupid technology." He hurled his phone onto the sofa and grabbed a Ming Dynasty vase from the mantel, a piece I had won at an auction in Hong Kong for $50,000. "Damn it," he roared, and smashed the vase against the fireplace. The porcelain shattered with a sickening crunch. $50,000 of history, reduced to dust in a second of tantrum. Alara shrieked. "Grant, are you crazy?" "I am under pressure," he bellowed. "You do not understand the pressure I am under." I did not flinch. I did not gasp. I simply stood up, picked up a dustpan, and walked over to the wreckage. "I will clean it up, sir," I said softly. I swept up the shards of the Ming vase. As I dropped the pieces into the bin, I was doing mental arithmetic. $2 million for the mortgage, $50,000 for the vase, $300,000 for the embezzled funds I found yesterday, plus emotional damages. He was going to pay for this. He was going to work in a prison laundry for the next 40 years to pay for this. Later that afternoon, while Grant was in the shower trying to wash away his panic, I slipped into the master bedroom again. I needed to check something I had seen on the inventory list of the safe. Something that was missing. I opened the drawer of his bedside table. Underneath a stack of adult magazines and unopened sleeping pill boxes, I found it. A Glock 19. Black, matte, deadly. I checked the serial number, filed off. It was an illegal weapon, likely purchased from the same people he owed money to. Grant was not just a thief. He was dangerous. A desperate man with a gun is a volatile variable I could not allow. I popped the magazine out. It was fully loaded. I ejected the round in the chamber. I emptied the bullets into my pocket, leaving the magazine empty. Then, I slid the magazine back into the gun and racked the slide. It clicked, sounding ominous but effectively harmless. I placed the gun back exactly where I found it. Let him think he had power. A gun without bullets is just a paperweight. The doorbell rang. I went downstairs to answer it. Standing on the porch was a woman who made Alara look warm and fuzzy. It was Beatrice Sterling, Grant's mother. She swept past me without a word, her nose in the air, smelling of gin and old money that wasn't hers. "Grant, darling," she called out. Grant came down the stairs, towel drying his hair. "Mother, what are you doing here?" "I came to see the new girl," she beamed, spotting Alara. She walked over and kissed Alara on both cheeks. "Oh, you are stunning. So much better than that. That cold fish he was married to." I stood by the door, closing it softly. "Cold fish." "And who is this?" Beatrice asked, waving a dismissive hand at me. "The new maid. She looks like a scarecrow. Grant, surely you can afford better uniforms." "She is cheap, Mom," Grant grunted. "Clara, get my mother a gin and tonic." "Yes, sir," I said. As I mixed the drink in the kitchen, I listened to them in the living room. "When is the divorce final?" Beatrice asked loudly. "I have already picked out a dress for the wedding, and I want the guest room redecorated. Mira had terrible taste. All that modern art, ugh." "Soon, Mom," Grant said. "We are just finalizing the assets." "Good," Beatrice cackled. "Take her for everything. Grant, she never deserved you. She was always too busy working to be a good wife. A woman's place is supporting her husband, not running a company." I squeezed a lime into the gin so hard the rind broke. Beatrice Sterling. I had paid off her mortgage 3 years ago. I had funded her hip replacement surgery. I had sent her flowers every birthday when her own son couldn't be bothered. And this was her gratitude. I placed the drink on a silver coaster and carried it out. "Here you go, ma'am," I said. Beatrice took the glass without looking at me. "About time. And fix your hair. You look like you just woke up." "Yes, ma'am," I said. I added Beatrice's name to the list in my head. It was getting long. Grant, Alara, Beatrice, Stevens the lawyer. I retreated to the kitchen, but I didn't leave. I stood by the door, watching them laugh, drinking my gin, sitting on my furniture, planning how to spend my money. They were celebrating a victory they hadn't won yet. They were toasting on the deck of the Titanic, and they didn't even know I was the iceberg. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from David. "David, the trap is set. The shareholders have accepted the meeting invitation. You live in 24 hours. I smiled beneath my mask. "Enjoy your drink. Beatrice," I whispered. "It will be your last one at Ironwood." The definition of hubris is a man standing on a trapdoor, demanding applause while he hands the executioner a lever. Alara Vance did not just want a dinner, she wanted a coronation. She wanted the Hamptons elite to flock to Ironwood Estate, kiss her ring, and acknowledge her as the new lady of the manor. It was a delusion so potent it was almost intoxicating to watch. "I want orchids," Alara declared, sweeping into the kitchen at 8 in the morning, her heels clicking on the floor I had just scrubbed. Thousands of them, white ones, and a jazz band. No, a string quartet. Classy. I want everyone to know that Grant Sterling has finally upgraded. Grant sat at the table, massaging his temples. The swelling in his face had gone down, but he looked haggard. The stress of the liquidity lock on his accounts was eating him alive. Though he was hiding it well enough from Alara, he saw this party not as a celebration, but as a lifeline. "Fine," Grant grunted, scrolling through his phone with frantic intensity. "Invite the board members. Invite the potential investors from Dubai. If we get them drunk enough, maybe they will sign the bridge loan contracts tonight." He turned to me. I was standing by the sink, peeling potatoes. My hair frizzed intentionally to look unkempt. "Clara," he barked, "you are in charge of the logistics. The event planner is sending the crew. But you need to manage the food service. Do not mess this up. If a single glass is empty, you are out on the street." "Yes, sir," I said, bobbing a clumsy curtsy. "I will make it a night to remember." Oh, I intended to keep that promise. As soon as they left to go shopping for Alara's dress using a credit card, I had secretly capped at $5,000, which was bound to be a humiliating decline at the register I got to work. My first call was to the luxury catering company Grant had hired. I impersonated his personal assistant, claiming a sudden budgetary restriction due to banking errors. I canceled the Wagyu beef sliders. I canceled the truffle risotto. I canceled the vintage Dom Perignon. Instead, I placed a rush order with a bulk discount warehouse in Queens. I ordered 300 pounds of their generic meat product meatballs, 5 cases of sparkling wine beverage that retailed for $4 a bottle, and 10 tins of lumpfish roe that was essentially salty black gelatin. I spent the next 3 hours transferring this culinary garbage onto my grandmother's antique Limoges china. I arranged the rubbery meatballs in artistic pyramids, garnished with sprigs of parsley from the garden to give them a deceptive gourmet flair. I poured the acidic, sugary wine into crystal decanters, tying velvet ribbons around the necks to hide the lack of corks. It was the ultimate test of the emperor's new clothes. These people were snobs. They would eat sludge if it was served on a silver platter by a woman in a uniform, too afraid to admit it tasted like cat food, for fear of looking unsophisticated. Next came the guest list. Alara had invited the social climbers and the sycophants. Grant had invited the money. I sat at my computer in the hidden server room and printed a few extra invitations on heavy cream cardstock. To Mrs. Cynthia Abernathy, the wife of the hedge fund manager Grant was currently trying to hustle. Cynthia was known for her temper and her hatred of mistresses. To Mrs. Joy Stevens, the wife of Grant's lawyer, she had no idea her husband helped Grant set up shell companies to hide assets from spouses. And finally, a digital invitation sent via an encrypted text to a number I had harvested from Alara's phone. To Mike Baby Bear. Message. She is announcing the engagement tonight. Ironwood Estate, 8 o'clock. Don't let her make a fool of you. I hit send. The cast was assembled. At 6 o'clock, the sun began to dip over the manicured lawns of the estate. The air was heavy, humid, a typical stifling New York summer evening. I went to the basement utility panel. The central air conditioning system of Ironwood was a marvel of engineering, capable of keeping the mansion at a crisp 68 degrees even in a heat wave. I located the breaker for the compressor units. I flipped it to off. However, I left the circulation fans on high. This meant the system would not cool the air. It would simply circulate the existing warm air, churning it around and around until the house became a convection oven. I went back upstairs and changed into my uniform. I chose a lightweight cotton blend that breathed easily. I pulled my hair back tight and donned my mask. The guests began to arrive at 7. Luxury sedans rolled up the driveway. Men in tuxedos and women in gowns that cost more than the average American salary stepped out, expecting a night of air-conditioned opulence. Alara was waiting in the foyer. She was wearing a dress that was tragic. It was a neon pink taffeta monstrosity, with a train so long it was a tripping hazard. It was tight, structured, and made of a synthetic fabric that did not breathe. "Welcome!" she shrieked, her voice pitched an octave too high. "Welcome to our home." Grant stood beside her, forcing a smile that looked like a grimace. He was already sweating. "Is it warm in here?" a woman with a diamond choker asked, fanning herself with a clutch purse. "Just a minor glitch with the sensors," Grant lied smoothly, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "It will cool down in a moment. Please, have some champagne. It is imported." I circulated through the room with a silver tray. "Champagne, sir ma'am." I offered the $4 swill with the reverence of a sommelier. I watched as the leading investment banker, a man who prided himself on his wine cellar, took a sip. His eyes widened. He swallowed hard, suppressing a gag reflex. "Interesting," he choked out. "Very fruity notes." "It is a rare vintage," I whispered confidentially. "Mr. Sterling saved it specially for you." The banker nodded sagely, terrified to admit he hated it. "Ah, yes, bold, very bold." By 8:30, the temperature in the grand hall had reached 85 degrees. The candles Alara had insisted on lighting were adding to the inferno. The facade was starting to melt, literally. Elara's makeup, a heavy layer of contour and foundation meant for a climate-controlled studio, began to separate. Rivulets of beige sludge were sliding down her neck. Her hair, teased into an intricate updo, was drooping as the humidity attacked the hairspray. She looked like a wax figure left out in the sun. "Grant," she hissed, grabbing his arm. "Fix the AC. I am dying." "I cannot fix it," Grant hissed back, his own shirt soaked through. "Just keep smiling. They are looking at us." They were looking, all right, but not with admiration. I walked past a cluster of socialites near the buffet table. They were poking at the meatballs with toothpicks. "Is this spam?" one of them whispered, horrified. "I think it is," her friend replied, sniffing the questionable caviar. "And this caviar tastes like salt and rubber. Is this some kind of ironic postmodern dining experience?" "It is tacky," the first woman sneered. "Just like her," she gestured to Elara. I glided back to the kitchen, suppressing a laugh that threatened to crack a rib. It was working. The discomfort made them critical. The heat made them irritable. Now for the coup de grace of the evening. I prepared a special tray of cocktails, 2 cosmopolitans. In the shaker, alongside the vodka and cranberry juice, I added the entire contents of a bottle of liquid magnesium citrate, a powerful saline laxative usually reserved for colonoscopy preps. It was tasteless in a strong cocktail, but its effects were violent and undeniable within 30 to 60 minutes. I walked out to the terrace where Grant's mother, Beatrice, was holding court with Elara. Beatrice was complaining about the heat. Her face flushed red. "This is intolerable, Grant," Beatrice moaned. "I feel faint." "Here, mother," Grant said, distracted as he looked around for investors. "Have a drink." I stepped forward. "Compliments of the house, ladies, a cooling cosmopolitan." Beatrice snatched the glass. Finally, something cold. Elara took the other one. "I need this. God, I need this." They clinked glasses. "To the new Mistress of Ironwood," Elara toasted, smirking at the guests who were glaring at her sweat-stained dress. "To upgrade," Beatrice agreed. They drank, they drained the glasses. I took the empty stems from their hands with a bow. "I will bring you some water to chase that down." I retreated to the shadows of the arched doorway. The timer had started. The atmosphere in the room was shifting from uncomfortable to hostile. The investors Grant was trying to corner were checking their watches. "Grant, about this bridge loan," one of them said, loosening his tie. "I am not sure the timing is right. The market is volatile." "Nonsense," Grant said, his voice rising in panic. "Vanguardian is rock solid. We have assets." "Do you?" the investor asked, looking around the sweating, uncomfortable room, the cheap food, and the melting hostess. "Because this does not look like a company on solid ground. This looks like desperation." Grant's face paled. Suddenly, Beatrice let out a low groan. She clutched her stomach. "Mother," Grant asked. I feel strange," Beatrice mumbled. Her face went from red to a sickly shade of gray. A gurgle, loud enough to be heard over the string quartet, emanated from her abdomen. Elara dropped her clutch. Her eyes went wide. The magnesium was working faster on her, perhaps because of her smaller frame. "Grant," Elara squeaked, clamping her hand over her mouth. "I think the appetizers." "What?" Grant snapped. "Not now, Elara." "I need to go," Elara gasped. She turned to run, but her long, tight dress restricted her movement. She stumbled, knocking into a waiter carrying a tray of the cheap red punch. The tray flipped. The red liquid splashed all over the front of the banker's white tuxedo. "You idiot!" the banker shouted. The room fell silent. The string quartet stopped playing. Elara stood there, red punch dripping from her pink dress, her makeup sliding off her face, her stomach churning with a violent rebellion. I, Elara started. Then, Beatrice let out a sharp cry of pain and doubled over. "My stomach poison! She poisoned us!" She pointed a shaking finger at me. All eyes turned to Clara, the humble maid in the corner. I widened my eyes in feigned terror. Me? Oh no. Ma'am, I only served what Mr. Sterling ordered from the warehouse, the Discount Meat Emporium. A gasp went through the room. Discount Meat Emporium, the banker repeated, looking at the meatball he had just swallowed with horror. Grant looked at me, betrayal and confusion warring in his eyes. What I never— You said to save money, sir, I cried out, my voice trembling with fake innocence. You said the investors wouldn't know the difference between pate and cat food. I did not, Grant roared. But it was too late. The damage was done. The investors looked at him with absolute disgust. To be cheap was one thing. To mock them was unforgivable. Beatrice groaned again and made a desperate waddle toward the bathroom, shoving guests out of her way. Elara followed, clutching her stomach, tears of humiliation streaking through the ruined contour on her cheeks. The party had devolved into a circus. The heat was oppressive. The smell of cheap meat and sweat hung in the stagnant air. I stood back against the wall, merging with the darkness. My face behind the mask was calm, serene even. This was not just a bad party. This was social suicide. Grant stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by angry guests and stained carpets. He looked like a captain whose ship had not just hit an iceberg, but had exploded on impact. And the night was not even over yet. I checked my watch. 9:30? The sound of a high-performance engine roared up the driveway outside. Baby Bear had arrived. The grand double doors of the Ironwood estate swung open with a force that rattled the hinges, introducing a draft of humid night air into the stifling, sweat-drenched oven of the grand hall. The new arrival was not an investor. He was not a socialite. He was a man who looked like he spent 90% of his life in a tanning bed and the other 10% lifting weights that were far too heavy for him. He wore a tight black t-shirt that strained against his biceps and jeans that were distressed in places where denim should not be distressed. This was Mike, or as Elara had affectionately named him in her contacts. Baby Bear. I stood in the shadows of the service corridor, my hands folded demurely in front of my apron. Watching the fuse I had lit finally reach the powder keg. Elara, Mike bellowed, his voice booming over the polite murmurs of the horrified guests. You liar! You told me you were at a meditation retreat. Elara froze. She was currently clutching her stomach with one hand and holding a glass of water with the other, trying desperately to keep the magnesium citrate from claiming her dignity. When she saw Mike, the color drained from her face, leaving only the streaks of melted foundation. Mike, she squeaked, what are you doing here? Grant, who had been in the middle of a desperate explanation to a skeptic hedge fund manager about why the air conditioning was broken, turned around. Who the hell is this? Mike marched into the center of the room, shoving past a waiter. He looked at Grant with a sneer. I am the guy she has been sleeping with for 6 months. Who are you? The sugar daddy. The room went deathly silent. Even the string quartet, who had been valiantly playing Mozart to drown out the sound of Beatrice's groans from the hallway, lowered their bows. Grant looked at Elara. His eyes were wide, bulging with a mixture of disbelief and fury. Sleeping with Elara. Do you know this person? No, Elara screamed, panic raising her voice to a shrill pitch. He is a stalker, Grant. Call security. He is crazy. Crazy? Mike laughed, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out his phone. Is that why you texted me 2 hours ago asking if I could pick you up because your cash cow was broken? Is that why you sent me a picture of his bank statement? Grant snatched the phone from Mike's hand. He stared at the screen. I knew exactly what he was seeing. It was the screenshot of the negative balance I had sent Elara earlier. You— Grant turned to Elara, his face purple with rage. You showed him my accounts. You called me a cash cow. He is lying, Elara sobbed, doubling over as a fresh wave of cramps hit her. Grant, please. My stomach hurts so much. I need a doctor. But the chaos was only just beginning. At that precise moment, a sound rippled through the room. It was not a human sound. It was digital.
Ping, 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 ping.
Every smartphone in the room buzzed simultaneously. It was a synchronized notification that sounded like a swarm of mechanical locusts descending on the party. The investors, who had been watching the domestic drama with a mixture of amusement and disgust, instinctively reached for their pockets. I watched the face of the lead banker. Mr. Sterling's primary target for the bridge loan. He unlocked his phone. He opened his email. His eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. David had timed it perfectly. The email subject line was simple: Notice of solvency irregularities and unauthorized debt structuring at Vanguardian Dynamics. Attached to the email were the forensic accounting reports, the evidence of the forged mortgage signature, and the threatening letters from the Viper Syndicate regarding Grant's gambling debts. "My God," the banker whispered, but in the silence, it sounded like a shout. "He is insolvent. He is completely leveraged." "What?" Grant spun around, distracted from his cheating mistress. "What did you say?" "You are a fraud. Sterling," the banker said, his voice dripping with ice. He held up his phone. "We just received the internal audit. You forged your wife's signature. You owe $3 million to a gambling ring." "That is fake," Grant screamed, waving his hands frantically. "That is a hack. Someone is trying to sabotage me." "It came from the chairwoman's office," another investor said, scrolling through the document. "It is signed by Mira Hartwell's executive team. The timestamp is from 10 minutes ago." "Mira is in Switzerland," Grant yelled. "She does not know anything." "Apparently she knows everything," the investor retorted. "I am leaving, and I am contacting the SEC. "Wait, no, please." Grant lunged for the investor's arm, but the man shook him off with a look of pure revulsion. The room erupted into movement. Guests were heading for the exits, eager to escape the heat, the bad food, and the smell of impending scandal. But the physical comedy was about to reach its zenith. Beatrice Sterling, Grant's mother, suddenly let out a shriek that curdled the blood. She had collapsed onto a velvet chaise lounge near the door, clutching her abdomen. "The bathroom," she wailed. "Out of my way, move." She scrambled up, shoving a socialite into a potted palm, and sprinted toward the powder room with a speed that defied her hip replacement. Elara was not so lucky. The stress of the confrontation, combined with the potent dose of magnesium, overwhelmed her system. As Mike stepped toward her to grab his phone back, Elara took a step backward. She stepped on the long, trailing hem of her ridiculous pink dress. She stumbled. Her arms flailed, seeking purchase. Her hand grasped the tablecloth of the dessert display. It was a slow-motion disaster. Elara fell backward. She dragged the tablecloth with her. The centerpiece of the table was a 5-foot tower of champagne glasses filled not with champagne, but with the cheap, sticky, sparkling wine I had poured earlier. Crash. The sound of shattering crystals was deafening. Elara landed hard on the floor, and the tower collapsed on top of her. Hundreds of glasses rained down, showering her in shards of glass and gallons of sticky, sugary liquid. She lay there in the wreckage, gasping for air, soaked from head to toe, looking like a discarded doll in a trash heap. The pink taffeta dress turned a dark, muddy crimson as it absorbed the wine. "My dress," she wailed. "My designer dress." Grant stared down at her. He looked at the ruined party. He looked at the departing investors. He looked at Mike, the lover who was laughing at the spectacle. Something in Grant snapped. The vein in his forehead pulsed. He walked over to Elara, grabbed her by the arm, and hauled her up from the sticky mess. Slap. The sound of his hand connecting with her cheek echoed through the cavernous hall. It was a sharp, brutal sound that stopped the few remaining guests in their tracks. "You ruined everything," Grant screamed, shaking her. "You greedy, cheating little parasite. I gave you everything I was going to give you this house." Elara touched her cheek. Her eyes, smeared with black mascara and wine, went wide with shock. Then, the shock turned to pure, unadulterated venom. The pain in her stomach and the humiliation of the moment stripped away her sweet, innocent girl mask completely. "Gave me," Elara shrieked back, shoving him away with surprising strength. You gave me nothing. You are broke. Grant, you are a loser. She pointed a shaking, sticky finger at him. You think I do not know, she yelled, projecting her voice to the rafters so everyone could hear. This is not your house. This house belongs to Mira. You are just the husband. You are a leech. You told me you were the CEO. But you are just a figurehead. You are nothing without that old woman. Grant froze. The truth hung in the air, naked and ugly. Shut up, he whispered. No, I will not shut up, Ilara screamed. She owns the company. She owns the cars. She owns the very air you breathe. You promised me you would commit her to an asylum so we could steal her money. But you are too incompetent to even do that right. A collective gasp went through the remaining crowd. The confession was absolute. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Conspiracy to commit false imprisonment. It was all laid bare. I stood in the corner, behind a large decorative fern near the kitchen entrance. The show was over. The actors had played their parts to perfection. The villains had destroyed each other. It was time for the director to take the stage. I reached up and unhooked the surgical mask from behind my ears. I let it drop to the floor. I reached up and pulled off the messy, frizzy wig I had been wearing for 4 days. My natural hair, sleek and straight, fell around my shoulders. I pulled a tissue from my apron pocket and wiped the gray makeup from under my eyes, revealing the sharp, clear skin underneath. I straightened my back. I let the hunch of Clara dissolve. My spine elongated, my chin lifted, my shoulders squared. The transformation was not just physical. It was energetic. I inhaled the humid, wine-scented air and exhaled the servant. I inhaled the queen. I stepped out from behind the fern. I did not walk. I glided. My movements were precise, predatory, and commanding. The cheap cotton uniform suddenly looked like high fashion simply because of the way I wore it. I walked toward the center of the chaos. The sound of my footsteps was different now. Before, I had shuffled. Now, my heels struck the marble floor with a rhythmic, authoritative click that cut through the sobbing and the shouting. One by one, the guests turned to look at me. They saw the uniform, but they did not see the maid. They saw the eyes. Grant was still staring at Ilara, his chest heaving. He sensed the shift in the room's energy. He turned his head slowly. He saw me. He blinked. He shook his head, as if trying to clear a smudge from his vision. Mira, he whispered. But his brain rejected the image. It was impossible. Mira was in Switzerland. Mira was old. Mira was crazy. This was Clara. This was the maid. No, Grant muttered, rubbing his eyes. I am hallucinating. It is the heat. It is the stress. He looked back at Ilara. Get up. We are leaving. I am not going anywhere with you, Ilara spat. Grant, I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried a resonance that froze him to the bone. It was not the raspy voice of Clara. It was the cool, modulated contralto of the chairwoman of Vanguardian Dynamics. Grant spun around again. He stared at me. He looked at the hair. He looked at the face. He looked at the eyes, the cold, hard eyes that had watched him sleep, watched him plot, and watched him fail. Who, he stammered, who are you? I did not answer him immediately. I walked past him to the table where the microphone for the band was set up. I picked it up. I tapped it once. Thump. The sound boomed through the speakers, causing a feedback squeal that made everyone wince. Ladies and gentlemen, I said into the microphone, I apologize for the lack of air conditioning and for the quality of the wine. It appears my husband has a taste for the cheap and the artificial. Grant's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair to support himself. Mira, he choked out, his voice a broken whisper. You were here? Ilara stopped crying. She looked up from her pile of broken glass. She squinted at me, wiping slime from her eyes. Clara, she gasped. I looked down at her from the stage. I offered her a smile, the same industrial, cold smile I had given her in the kitchen 4 days ago. No, Ilara, I said smoothly. Clara was the one who scrubbed your toilets. I am the one who owns them. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hovering at the top of its arc, waiting for gravity to do its work. I looked at Grant. "You wanted a party. Grant, you wanted to show the world the new master of Ironwood." I spread my arms wide, encompassing the wreckage, the filth, and the ruined lives before me. "Congratulations," I said. "You have their attention." The feedback from the microphone sliced through the humid air like a physical blade, a high-pitched screech that brought the chaotic murmur of the room to an instant. Dead halt. I stood on the raised platform at the far end of the grand hall, a space usually reserved for string quartets and toastmasters. I held the microphone with a relaxed grip, my posture straight, my chin raised. The transformation was complete. The hunch of the servant was gone. The deferential gaze was gone. In their place stood the woman who had negotiated hostile takeovers in Tokyo and fired incompetent executives in London without blinking. "Welcome to Ironwood," I said. My voice boomed through the speakers, magnified, crystal clear, and devoid of any warmth. "I hope you have all enjoyed the immersive theater performance we staged for you this evening." Below me, the scene was a tableau of ruin. Grant was gripping the back of a chair, his face a mask of pale shock. Alara was still on the floor in her wine-soaked dress. Looking up at me through a curtain of sticky, matted hair, Beatrice, who had been staggering toward the bathroom, had frozen mid-step, clutching her stomach. Grant blinked rapidly, his eyes darting between me and the kitchen door where Clara should have been. His brain was misfiring, unable to reconcile the two realities. "Clara," he choked out, his voice cracking. "What are you doing? Get down from there. You are drunk." Alara wiped slime from her eyes. "The nanny," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Grant, why is the nanny on the stage?" I laughed. It was a low, dry sound that echoed in the silence. "The nanny," I repeated, savoring the word. "Is that what you saw? Grant a uniform, a mask, a servant." I stepped closer to the edge of the stage, looking down at them with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining bacteria under a slide. "You never looked at me, Grant," I said softly into the mic. "In 4 days, you never once looked me in the eye. You were so blinded by your own arrogance, so consumed by your petty greed, that you did not recognize the woman you have been married to for 7 years. "No," Grant shook his head, taking a step back. "No, you are in Switzerland. You are sick. You are crazy." "I am Mira Hartwell Sterling," I declared, my voice hardening into steel. "I am the sole owner of this estate. I am the chairwoman of the board of Vanguardian Dynamics, and you, Grant, are trespassing in my home." A ripple of shock went through the remaining crowd. The investors, men and women who controlled billions of dollars in capital, stopped inching toward the door. They turned back, sensing that the real show was just beginning. "This is a lie," Alara screamed from the floor. "She is the maid I saw her scrubbing the toilet. She is lying."
Am I asked.
I reached into the pocket of my apron a garment I was still wearing, a deliberate symbol of their humiliation, and pulled out a small remote control. "Let us review the highlights of your tenure as the Master of Ironwood," I said. I pointed the remote at the massive projection screen that had been set up behind me. Grant had intended to use this screen to display flowcharts and projected earnings to dazzle the investors. Instead, the screen flickered to life with a high-definition video feed. The first image was grainy but clear. It was the kitchen, recorded 3 days ago. On the screen, Grant was leaning against the counter, holding a glass of whiskey. Alara was sitting on the island. Audio. "She is senile," Grant's recorded voice boomed through the hall. 34 going on 80. We will have her committed by the end of the month. I have a doctor who will sign anything for $10,000. The crowd gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. "Fraud," Mr. Henderson, the lead banker, whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Conspiracy to commit medical fraud." Grant stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. That is out of context, he yelled. I pressed the button again. The scene changed. It was the master bedroom. Alara was tearing through my closet, throwing my clothes on the floor. Audio. I hate her taste. Alara's voice whined. It is so boring. When she is gone, I am burning all of this. Grant, did you find the deed yet? I want my name on it before the wedding. Audio. Relax, baby, Grant replied, walking into the frame. I am forging the transfer documents tonight. Once she is locked up, I have power of attorney. We take the house, we take the accounts, and we dump her in a state facility. I paused the video. The image of Grant and Alara laughing over their plan to destroy me froze on the giant screen, looming over them like a judgment from God. I looked at the investors. As you can see, I said calmly, my husband's business strategy relies heavily on felony embezzlement and domestic abuse. I trust this clarifies why the bridge loan you were discussing is unavailable. You monster! A woman in the front row hissed at Grant. Grant looked around wildly. The eyes that had looked at him with respect an hour ago were now filled with revulsion. He was stripping naked in front of the people he needed to impress the most. Turn it off! Grant screamed, lunging toward the stage. Turn it off right now. This is illegal. You cannot record me in my own house. My house, I corrected him. And actually, under New York state law, I can record whatever I want in my primary residence, especially when investigating a crime. I pressed the button one last time. The screen showed the library. Grant was on the phone, his back to the camera, but his reflection was visible in the window. Audio. I know I owe you money, Viper. I am good at it. I am selling the battery patent to Apex Corp next week. Yes, under the table. I will gut the company if I have to. Just do not break my legs. The silence that followed this clip was heavy, oppressive, and absolute. Selling proprietary technology to a competitor, it was corporate treason. It was the death knell of his career. I turned off the screen. The room went dark for a second before the house lights, which I had re-enabled from my phone, flooded the hall with a harsh, unforgiving brightness. Grant Sterling, I said, my voice projecting authority that did not need a microphone anymore. I sent an email to the board of directors 15 minutes ago. They convened an emergency vote via a secure channel. The vote was unanimous. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. You are fired, effective immediately. Your access to the building is revoked. Your company credit cards have been terminated. Your stock options have been frozen pending a federal investigation into insider trading and corporate espionage. Grant stood in the center of the room. He looked small. The swagger was gone. The arrogance was gone. He was just a man in a sweaty tuxedo who owed money to dangerous people and had just lost his only way to pay them back. You cannot do this, Grant whispered. I am the CEO. You were a placeholder, I said coldly, and a poor one at that. Suddenly, a wail pierced the air. Beatrice Sterling. She had been leaning against the wall, her face gray with pain and shock. The revelation that her son was not a genius businessman, but a criminal who was about to lose everything, was too much for her fragile ego to handle. My money, she screamed. What about my allowance, Grant? You said you were rich. And then, with a theatricality that fit the evening perfectly, her eyes rolled back in her head. She slumped to the floor in a dead faint, her gin and tonic spilling across the marble. Mother, Grant yelled, but he did not move to help her. He was staring at me. His shock was curdling into something else. Rage, pure, animalistic rage. He realized there was no talking his way out of this. There was no spin. There was no charm. I had not just beaten him. I had dissected him. You bitch, Grant roared. He grabbed a steak knife from a nearby abandoned dinner plate. The silver glinted under the chandeliers. Grant, no, Alara screamed from the floor. Grant did not listen. He was the last reason. He was a cornered rat, and I was the cat that had cornered him. He charged at the stage. I will kill you, he screamed.
You ruined my life. I will kill you.
The investors screamed and scattered. Grant took the stairs to stage 2 at a time, the knife raised high. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply stood there, watching him come. He reached the top of the stairs. He was 5 feet away, 3 feet. Then the shadows moved. 2 men who had been dressed as waiters, standing quietly by the service entrance all night, moved with a speed that blurred the eye. They were not waiters. They were former distinct military operatives I had kept on my personal payroll for 5 years. One of them, a man the size of a vending machine, intercepted Grant mid-stride. He did not strike him. He simply caught Grant's wrist, the one holding the knife, and twisted.
Crack.
Grant howled as the knife clattered to the floor. The bodyguard swept Grant's legs out from under him, slamming him face first onto the wooden stage. The sound of the impact vibrated through the floorboards under my feet. The second bodyguard stepped forward, placing a heavy boot in the center of Grant's back, pinning him like an insect. "Secure," the bodyguard said calmly. Grant was thrashing, spitting blood, screaming obscenities into the wood. "Get off me. Do you know who I am?" "We know who you are," I said, looking down at him. "You are the intruder." I looked out at the room. The guests were huddled in the corners, terrified, but unable to look away. "I apologize for the violence," I said to them, my voice smooth. "Security will escort you to your vehicles. Please drive safely." The guests did not need to be told twice. They fled. They ran for the doors, leaving their half-eaten meatballs and their dignity behind. In the commotion, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye.
Elara.
She had managed to stand up. She was barefoot, holding her ruined shoes in one hand, trying to limp toward the French doors that led to the garden. She was trying to sneak away, to disappear into the night before the consequences caught up with her.
Going somewhere, Elara, I asked.
My voice stopped her. She froze, her hand on the door handle. She turned slowly to face me. She looked pathetic. The arrogance of the girl who had demanded coffee 4 days ago was gone, replaced by the terror of a child caught stealing. I am just leaving," she stammered. "This is between you and him. I did not do anything. I was just the girlfriend. I did not know." "You did not know," I raised an eyebrow. "The video suggests otherwise. You knew about the fraud. You knew about the plan to institutionalize me. You were an active participant in the conspiracy." "I was manipulated," she cried, playing the victim card one last time. "He made me do it. He promised me things. I am innocent." "Innocence is for people who do not steal," I said. I walked down the stairs of the stage, stepping over Grant's writhing body. I walked across the empty dance floor until I was standing 2 feet away from her. The smell of cheap wine and fear radiating off her was pungent. I looked at her left hand. She was clutching her shoes, but the ring was still there, my mother's diamond, sparkling defiantly amidst the filth. "That ring," I said, pointing to it. Elara looked down at her hand. She covered it with her other hand, a reflex of greed. "He gave it to me. It was a gift." "It was not his to give," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "That ring is a Hartwell family heirloom. It is valued at $250,000. In the state of New York, possession of stolen property exceeding $1 million is a Class B felony. But even at this value, combined with the other items you borrowed, the clothes, the jewelry, the art, we are well into the territory of grand larceny in the second degree." Elara's eyes went wide. She knew what that meant. Prison time. She whimpered. So, I continued, holding out my hand, palm up. "You have a choice. You can walk out that door wearing it, and my security team will detain you for the police as a thief caught in the act. Or you can give it back, and I might let you run as far as your barefoot legs can carry you before the lawyers catch up." Elara looked at the door. She looked at the bodyguards pinning Grant. She looked at my face, which offered zero mercy. With trembling hands, she pulled the ring off her finger. It was tight. Her fingers were swollen from the heat and the alcohol. She yanked it, wincing, until it popped free. She dropped it into my palm. It felt heavy and cold. "It is cursed anyway," she spat, trying to regain a shred of bravado. "It is not cursed," I said, wiping the ring on a clean corner of my apron and slipping it onto my own finger, where it belonged. "It just has high standards, and you, my dear, did not meet them." I stepped aside. "Run," I said. Elara did not wait. She threw open the French doors and bolted into the humid night. Running across the lawn, disappearing into the darkness of the estate she thought she would own. I watched her go. She would not get far. The gate was locked, and I had already forwarded her details to the authorities. But letting her run, letting her feel the panic of being hunted, was a punishment in itself. I turned back to the room. Grant was still pinned on the stage. Beatrice was unconscious on the floor. The party was over. I looked at the ring on my finger. It sparkled under the house lights, clean and bright. "David," I said into the air, knowing he was listening through the security feed. "Call the police. Tell them we have an intruder situation. And tell them to bring an ambulance for the old woman. I do not want her dying on my carpet." I walked over to the table, picked up a clean glass, and poured myself a glass of water. I took a sip. It was cool, refreshing, and tasted like victory. The silence in the grand hall was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and thick with the smell of spilled alcohol and defeat. My two security operatives pulled Grant off the stage floor and shoved him into a chair. He slumped there, gasping for breath, blood trickling from a cut on his lip onto his ruined tuxedo shirt. I did not reach for my phone to dial 911. Not yet. The police were a blunt instrument, and I needed a scalpel. I needed to excise the tumor of Grant Sterling from my life completely before I let the authorities dispose of the remains. I motioned to the shadows. David, my executive assistant, stepped forward. He had been waiting in the library, listening to the entire performance. He carried a thick leather briefcase. He placed it on the table in front of me with a heavy thud. I opened the case. Inside was a stack of documents 3 inches thick. I pulled them out and laid them on the table, smoothing the paper with a deliberate slowness that I knew was driving Grant insane. "What is this?" Grant rasped, wiping blood from his mouth. "Are you going to torture me with paperwork?" "In a manner of speaking," I replied, sitting down opposite him. I picked up the first file. "This," I said, sliding it toward him, "is a forensic audit of your activities over the last 18 months. It details 47 instances of wire fraud. It documents the embezzlement of $4.2 million from the Vanguardian Operational Fund. It also contains the proof of the credit card fraud you committed using my identity." Grant stared at the folder but did not touch it. "And this," I picked up a second, thinner file, "is the draft of a criminal complaint for the theft of trade secrets, specifically, the unauthorized attempted sale of the Project Eclipse battery patent to Apex Corporation. Under the Economic Espionage Act, stealing trade secrets to benefit a foreign entity or competitor carries a sentence of up to 15 years in federal prison." I folded my hands. Do the math. Grant, wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, corporate espionage. If I hand this file to the district attorney, you are looking at 20 to 25 years. You will be an old man when you get out, and you will be broke. Grant paled. The reality of the numbers was hitting him harder than the bodyguard's tackle. He was a soft man. He liked silk sheets and heated floors. The concept of 2 decades in a concrete cell terrified him more than death. "What do you want?" he whispered. "You want me to beg." "I want efficiency," I said. "Trials are messy. They are public. They drag on for months. I do not want to see your face in a courtroom for the next 2 years. I want you gone, tonight." I pulled a third document from the briefcase. It was stapled and flagged with yellow sticky notes where signatures were required. "This is an uncontested divorce settlement," I said, "and a post-nuptial agreement modification." I placed a pen on top of it. "Here is the deal. Grant, option A is the files on the left. I call the police right now. I hand them everything, and you go to prison for the rest of your useful life. I tapped the divorce papers. Option B is you sign this. You admit to adultery. You waive all rights to the Ironwood estate. You waive all claims to Vanguardian Dynamics stock. You accept full legal liability for the personal debts you have incurred, including the $3 million you owe to the gambling syndicate. You leave this marriage with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your back. Grant looked at the papers. You want me to take all the debt? The Viper debt? They will kill me. Mira. That sounds like a personal problem, I said coldly. But here's the trade. If you sign this and give me a clean, immediate divorce, I will agree not to press charges for the theft of the battery patent. I will not sue you for corporate espionage. I will keep the company lawyers off your back. Grant's eyes darted around the room. He was calculating. If he signed, he was broke and hunted by loan sharks. If he didn't sign, he was in federal prison. In his warped mind, he thought he could outrun the loan sharks. He thought he could con his way out of debt if he was free. But prison was a dead end. If I sign, he asked, his voice trembling, you drop the espionage charges. You let me walk out of here. If you sign, I said, I will not pursue the trade secret theft claim, and you can walk out that door. He hesitated for only a second. The cowardice that defined his entire existence took over. He grabbed the pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely form the letters. But he signed. He signed the divorce decree. He signed the asset waiver. He signed the admission of guilt. He signed his life away to save his skin. Done, he said, throwing the pen down. I signed it. Now let me go. I picked up the papers and checked the signatures. They were valid. I handed them to David, who immediately scanned them into the cloud using his tablet. The timestamp was locked. The divorce was effectively sealed. Excellent, I said. You are now my ex-husband, which means you are officially trespassing. I am leaving. Grant stood up, staggering slightly. I am getting out of this hellhole. Sit down, I commanded. We are not finished. We made a deal, Grant shouted. We did, I agreed, but we have another guest to attend to. I nodded to the security team leader. Bring her in. The heavy oak doors opened, and 2 more guards dragged Alara into the room. She had not made it far. The perimeter of Ironwood was secured by 8-foot walls and motion sensors. She had been intercepted near the east gate, trying to climb over the wrought iron fence. She looked disastrous. Her pink dress was torn and muddy. Her feet were bleeding. She was crying hysterically, struggling against the grip of the guards. Let me go, she shrieked. I am an American citizen. You cannot kidnap me. They dumped her into the chair next to Grant. She looked at him, then at me, her eyes wide with terror. Grant, she sobbed. Help me. They hurt me. Grant did not even look at her. He was staring at the door, focused solely on his own escape. Alara Vance, I said, picking up a final folder from the briefcase. It is so nice of you to join us. I want a lawyer, Alara spat, trying to summon some of her old defiance. You are going to need one, I replied. David, show her the exhibits. David placed a tablet in front of her. On the screen was a series of text messages. This, I said, pointing to the screen, is a conversation between you and a contact listed as Pawn Shop Eddie in Queens. It is dated 3 days ago. In it, you send him a photo of a diamond bracelet, my diamond bracelet, and ask how much cash he can give you for it without paperwork. Alara gasped. I never sent that. That is fake. And this, I swiped the screen, is a message to your friend, Baby Bear. Mike, you explicitly state, and I quote, once we get the old hag committed, we sell the art collection. I already have a buyer in Jersey who takes stolen goods. I leaned forward. That is a conspiracy to commit grand larceny. That is trafficking in stolen property. And since you crossed state lines to arrange the sale with the buyer in New Jersey, it is a federal crime. Alara began to shake. Her defiance evaporated, leaving only a scared child. I didn't do it, she wailed, turning to Grant. It was him. It was all Grant's idea. He told me to sell the bracelet. He said it was his mother's. He made me do it. Grant jumped up. You lying little witch. You stole that bracelet yourself. I told you not to touch her jewelry. You said we needed cash for the wedding, Alara screamed back, clawing at him. You said Mira would never notice. You are the thief. I am just a victim. I am the victim, Grant roared. You seduced me. You distracted me while my company was falling apart. They were tearing each other apart, just as I had predicted. The rats were eating each other on the sinking ship.
Enough, I said. They both fell silent, panting.
Alara looked at me, tears streaming down her muddy face. She slid out of her chair and fell to her knees.
Mira, Mrs. Sterling, please, she begged, crawling toward me. I am sorry, I was stupid. I did not know. Please do not send me to jail. I have a career. I can't go to jail. Look at me. I am not built for jail.
You are right, I said, looking down at her dispassionately. You are not. Orange is definitely not your color.
Please, she sobbed, grabbing the hem of my apron. I will do anything. I will testify against him. I will tell the police everything he did. Just let me go.
I pulled my apron from her grasp.
I am not a judge, Alara, I said softly, and I am certainly not a priest. I do not grant absolution. I am just the victim here. And victims do not decide the punishment. The law does.
You are heartless, Alara cried, collapsing on the floor.
Grant had had enough. He saw his opening while I was distracted with Alara. He grabbed his jacket. I am done with this, he muttered. I signed your papers. I gave you the divorce. I am leaving. Good luck with the house. Mira, I hope it burns down.
He turned and walked toward the main doors. He walked with a desperate urgency, his hand reaching for the brass handle. He thought he had won. He thought he had outsmarted me by giving up the assets to save his freedom. He gripped the handle.
Grant, I called out.
He stopped, but he did not turn around. What? The deal is done. You said you wouldn't sue me for the trade secrets.
I did say that, I agreed, standing up. And I am a woman of my word. I will not file a civil suit for the patent theft, and I will not press charges for corporate espionage.
Grant pushed the door open. The humid night air rushed in. Good, then go to hell.
But, I added, my voice cutting through the night air like a gunshot, I never promised I wouldn't report the money laundering to the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Grant froze. He stood in the doorway, half in the light, half in the dark. Slowly, agonizingly. He turned around.
What? He whispered.
The $3 million you owe the gambling syndicate, I said, walking toward him. You didn't just borrow it. You tried to pay it back by funneling company funds through a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. A shell corporation that is currently flagged by the Department of Justice as a front for international organized crime. I held up my phone. Structuring financial transactions to conceal the source of funds is a violation of the Money Laundering Control Act, specifically Title 18, United States Code, Section 1956. It carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years, and unlike corporate espionage, which requires a victim to press charges, money laundering is a crime against the state. The FBI does not need my permission to prosecute you. They just needed my evidence.
You? Grant's face went gray. You set me up.
I facilitated justice, I corrected. You assumed that because I offered you a deal on one crime, I was absolving you of all of them. You were wrong. The divorce papers only protected you from me. Grant, they do not protect you from the United States government. Grant let go of the door handle. His legs began to shake. No, you are bluffing. You didn't call them. You wouldn't destroy the company's reputation like that. The company is already restructuring under my name, I said. We will survive the scandal. You will not. As if on cue, a sound began to rise from the bottom of the long driveway.
Wail, wail, wail.
It was the distinct, piercing siren of multiple emergency vehicles. Blue and red lights began to flash against the trees lining the estate entrance, growing brighter and closer with every second. Grant watched the lights reflect in the glass of the French doors. The reality crashed down on him. The signature he had just put on the divorce papers meant he had no money for a lawyer. He had no assets to use for bail. He had admitted to the debts. He had handed me the divorce on a silver platter, and I had handed him to the feds wrapped in a bow.
You called them, Grant whispered, looking at me with horror. You called them before the party even started. Of course I did, I said, checking my watch. I told them there was an active situation involving a high-flight risk suspect involved in a RICO case. They are very punctual. The screech of tires on gravel filled the air. Doors slammed. Voices shouted commands. Grant Sterling. Come out with your hands up. A voice amplified by a megaphone boomed from the driveway. Grant looked at me one last time. There was no hatred left in his eyes, only the hollow, devastating realization that he had been outplayed by a master. Why, he asked. Why give me the choice to sign the divorce papers if you were going to arrest me anyway? I smiled. It was the only genuine smile I had given him in years. Because, Grant, I said, I wanted to make sure that when you go to prison, you go as a poor man, not a rich one. I wanted my house back, and I wanted you to know, every night for the next 20 years, that you signed your own death warrant. I gestured to the door. Go on, I said. Your ride is here. Grant took a step toward the open door, the red and blue lights bathing his face in a chaotic strobe. He saw the armed officers crouching behind their cruisers. He saw the end of his life. And then, he snapped. It was the primal, terrified reflex of a cornered animal realizing the cage was locking shut instead of walking out. Grant slammed the heavy oak doors shut against the night, momentarily blocking the sight of the law. No, he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. I am not going to prison. He spun around, eyes wild, searching for leverage. He knew the police would breach in seconds. He needed a shield. His gaze landed on the dessert table, where the heavy silver cake knife, a serrated 12-inch blade, glinted under the chandelier. He lunged for it, grabbing the handle. Then he turned to the only vulnerable person in the room, Alara. She was still on the floor, sobbing into her hands, oblivious to the shift in the atmosphere until Grant's hand tangled into her hair. He yanked her upward with brutal force. No, Alara shrieked. Grant, what are you doing? Grant hauled her against his chest, pressing the serrated edge of the knife against her throat. Back off, he bellowed at my bodyguards. I will cut her, I swear to God. Suddenly, the front doors exploded inward. Crash! A battering ram took the lock off the frame. A dozen figures in heavy tactical gear poured into the room. Police dropped the weapon. The shout was a wall of sound. Laser sights danced across the room, converging on Grant's chest, but he dragged Alara backward, using her as a human shield, retreating toward the kitchen. Stay back, Grant yelled. I have a hostage. I stood on the bottom step of the grand staircase, watching him unravel. Look at you, Grant, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. Holding a knife to the woman you claim to love. You look pathetic. Shut up, he screamed. This is your fault. It is your choice, I corrected. Just like the gun upstairs, the Glock 19 you are hoping to reach. I unloaded it 4 days ago. It is empty. Grant, just like you. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. Distracted, his grip loosened slightly. Alara seized the moment and bit his hand with feral intensity. Gah! Grant howled, jerking back. Alara scrambled away, crawling through the broken glass. Get down! The SWAT team shouted, but Grant was past reason, humiliated, stripped of his assets, and now exposed as a coward. He saw only one target left, me. I will kill you, he roared. He ignored the police. He gripped the knife and sprinted across the slick marble floor, heading straight for the staircase where I stood. Drop it, the agents screamed. But they couldn't shoot. I was directly in the line of fire behind him. He was coming up the stairs. 10 feet, 5 feet. I saw the madness in his eyes. I saw the blade thrusting upward toward my chest. I did not flinch. I waited until the last possible second. As he lunged, I simply took one deliberate, elegant step backward and to the left. It was a move I had perfected in the boardroom, but it worked just as well in combat. Grant's momentum was too great. He slashed at the empty air where I had been standing. His expensive leather dress shoe landed hard on the polished marble steps, slick with the cheap sparkling wine that had spilled during the chaos earlier. There was no traction. Physics took over. His leg shot out from under him. His forward momentum transformed into a rotational force. He went airborne, his arms flailing, the knife flying from his grip and clattering harmlessly against the banister. "No," he gasped. He slammed face first into the edge of the marble step. Crack! The sound was sickeningly loud, the sound of bone meeting stone. He slid backward down the stairs, his body limp, tumbling like a rag doll. He rolled over once, twice, and came to a stop at the bottom of the landing, face up. He lay sprawled in the wreckage of the desert tower he had knocked over earlier. He was covered in cake frosting, broken glass, and cheap wine. Silence descended on the room. The SWAT team lowered their weapons slightly, moving in with caution. "Suspect down," an officer shouted. "Clear the area." I stood on the landing, looking down. Grant was not moving. A trickle of blood ran from his forehead, mixing with the white frosting on his cheek. His chest was rising and falling and shallow. Ragged breaths. He was alive, unconscious, concussed, and broken, but alive. "Secure him," the team leader commanded. 3 officers pounced on Grant, rolling him over and zip-tying his hands behind his back. They were not gentle. Another team moved to Alara. She was curled in a fetal position near the window, shaking violently. "Alara Vance," an agent asked, pulling her to her feet. "I am the victim," she sobbed, holding her hands up. "He took me hostage. He tried to kill me." "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit grand larceny and trafficking in stolen goods," the agent said, spinning her around. The metallic click of the handcuffs locking around her wrists echoed through the hall. "No," Alara screamed, thrashing. "My career. You cannot do this. Look at me. I am an influencer. I have followers." "You have the right to remain silent," the agent recited, dragging her toward the door. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I watched them drag her out. She looked at me one last time as she passed the stairs. Her eyes were pleading, begging for the mercy I had already told her I did not possess. I held her gaze until they pushed her through the broken doors and into the flashing night. Then I looked at Grant. The paramedics were moving in now, checking his vitals. One of them shined a light in his eyes. "He is out cold," the medic said. "Looks like a severe concussion, broken nose, maybe a fractured orbital." "He will live," the FBI agent said, holstering his weapon. "Which is good. The district attorney wants him conscious for the arraignment." The agent looked up at me. He nodded, a gesture of professional respect. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, "are you injured?" "No, agent," I replied, smoothing the front of my apron. "I am perfectly fine." "That was a close call," he said, eyeing the spot on the stairs where Grant had slipped. "He always was clumsy," I said. "He never watched where he was going." They loaded Grant onto a stretcher. They strapped him down, securing his hands and feet. As they wheeled him out, his head lolled to the side. He looked small, defeated, the man who had terrorized me, who had plotted to steal my sanity and my life, was now just a patient in the custody of the Department of Corrections. The room began to clear. The police were taking photos of the scene, the broken glass, the knife, the ruined party. I walked down the stairs. My heels clicked on the marble, avoiding the smear of grease where Grant had met his end. I walked over to the knife. It was lying near the base of a column. I looked at it. It was a wedding gift from my aunt. It was sterling silver. I beckoned to David, who had emerged from the library. "David," I said. "Yes, Mira." "When the police are done with that knife as evidence," I said, gesturing to it, "have it melted down." "Understood," David said,
And the house? I looked around. The walls were smeared with food. The carpet was stained with wine. The air smelled of violence and betrayal. It was a disaster zone. But it was my disaster zone. Call the cleaning crew, I said. The expensive ones. I want every trace of this night erased by morning. I want the carpets replaced. I want the walls repainted. I want the air filters changed. Consider it done, David said. I walked to the French doors where Alara had tried to escape. I pushed them open and stepped out onto the terrace. The humidity had broken. A cool breeze was blowing in from the ocean. I took a deep breath. The air tasted clean. It tasted like freedom. The red and blue lights were fading as the convoy of police vehicles moved down the driveway, taking the garbage away. Grant was gone. Alara was gone. The parasites had been purged. I leaned against the stone balustrade and looked out at the dark expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. My heart rate was steady. My hands were steady. I had won. But I wasn't just a survivor, I was the victor, and the difference, as Grant had learned the hard way, was that a survivor just wants to escape, but a victor wants to ensure the enemy never rises again. I turned back to the empty house. Now, I whispered to the silence, let's get back to work. The flashing lights of the police cruiser faded into the distance, taking with them the debris of my past life. I stood on the porch, watching until the red taillights were nothing more than pinpricks in the darkness. Swallowed by the winding roads of the Hamptons, Grant was gone. Alara was gone. I walked back into the grand hall. The silence was profound. It was not the empty silence of abandonment. It was the heavy, pregnant silence of a battlefield after the cannons had stopped firing. The floor was a sticky map of the night's violent smashed cake, spilled wine, shards of crystal, and the faint, copper smear of Grant's blood on the marble step. The heavy oak door to the servants' quarters opened. Alfred, my head butler, stepped out. He had been on paid leave for the last month, a leave I had insisted on, so he would not witness the degradation of my home by Alara and Grant. I had called him 10 minutes ago. He wore his impeccable black suit. He looked at the wreckage of the room, his expression unreadable, though I saw a flicker of disdain as he eyed the cheap, overturned tables. "Welcome back, Alfred," I said, my voice echoing in the cavernous room. "Madam," Alfred bowed slightly. "It appears the guests were spirited." "The guests were vermin," I corrected, "and the house is infected." I walked over to the spot where Alara had sat, crying and lying about her innocence. I pointed to the rug, a Persian silk masterpiece from the 18th century that was now stained with cheap red wine and betrayal. "Get rid of it," I commanded. "Shall I have it professionally cleaned, madam?" Alfred asked. "No," I said, looking at the stain. "Burn it." Alfred did not blink. "Very good, madam." "And the furniture in the master bedroom," I continued, walking toward the fireplace, "the sheets, the mattress, the curtains she touched, the clothes in Grant's closet, burn it all. I do not want a single atom of their existence remaining in this zip code. If it cannot be burned, crush it. If it cannot be crushed, bury it." "I will organize the team immediately," Alfred said. "And for breakfast?" "Black coffee?" I said. "Strong." I went to study, the real one, not the library where Grant played at being a businessman, but the office in the West Wing where the real work happened. I sat down at my desk. It was made of solid mahogany, cool and grounding under my hands. David was already there, standing by the window, tapping on his tablet. "The police report is filed," David said without turning around. "The district attorney is charging Grant with attempted murder, kidnapping, and money laundering. He is looking at 25 years, minimum. Alara is being processed for grand larceny. They found the rest of your jewelry in her apartment in the city. She had a bag packed for Rio." "She never would have made it to the airport," I said, opening my laptop. "She is too stupid to navigate international customs." "There is more," David said, turning to face me with a grim smile. "Grant is currently in the prison ward at Bellevue. He is conscious, and he just met his court-appointed attorney." I leaned back in my chair. "Let me guess.
Mr. Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood, David confirmed.
A cold satisfaction settled in my chest. Grant did not know that Mr. Blackwood, the high-powered criminal defense lawyer who had miraculously appeared to take his case pro bono, was actually on a retainer from one of my holding companies. Did Blackwood give him the advice? I asked. He did, David chuckled. He told Grant that his only chance for a reduced sentence, maybe 10 years instead of 20, was to cooperate fully with the FBI regarding the gambling syndicate. He told Grant to name names, to give them dates, locations, and the identity of Viper.
And Grant?
He is singing like a canary, David said. He thinks he is buying his freedom. He has no idea he is signing his death warrant. I nodded. It was the perfect trap. By testifying against the syndicate, Grant would become a liability to the mob. He would be marked. His life in prison would not be a quiet rehabilitation. It would be a daily struggle for survival. He would spend every hour looking over his shoulder. Terrified of the shadow in the corner, it was a far more fitting punishment than simple incarceration. Fear is a much heavier chain than iron.
And the girl? I asked.
David tapped his screen and projected a social media feed onto the wall. Elara Vance is trending, David said, but not in the way she wanted. I looked at the screen. The photos from the party, the ones taken by the disgusted guests, were everywhere. Elara covered in wine, Elara being handcuffed, Elara screaming like a banshee. But it was the comments that were the real execution. Someone had dug up her high school yearbook. Someone else had found her old blog, where she bragged about targeting married men. The internet, in its ruthless efficiency, had stripped her bare. She was not a victim. She was a meme, a laughingstock, a cautionary tale about greed and bad waterproof mascara. She will never show her face in New York again, David said. Her reputation is incinerated.
Good, I said. Cancel her gym membership. I paid for that too.
I turned my attention to the document on my laptop screen. It was a transfer order for the shares of Vanguardian Dynamics. Grant had damaged the brand. His association with the company, however brief and incompetent, was a stain. I needed to scrub it clean. I am liquidating the domestic holdings, I told David. Everything Grant touched, the Consumer Electronics Division, the Project Eclipse battery initiative, sell it all.
The market will panic, David warned. The stock will dip.
Let it dip, I said, typing my digital signature. I am buying back the controlling interest at the lower price under the new holding company, Phoenix Corp. And the proceeds from the sale of Grant's pet projects, I want $40 million transferred to a new trust.
What is the trust for? David asked.
The Hartwell Initiative, I said. A legal defense and housing fund for women trapped in abusive marriages who cannot afford to leave. I want to make sure the next woman Grant targets has a lawyer before he even buys her a drink.
David smiled, a poetic use of his failure.
It is efficient, I said. Waste not, want not.
I closed the laptop. The business was done. The legal traps were set. The house was being purged.
I stood up and walked to the fireplace. The flames were roaring, fed by the dry logs Alfred had just added. The heat was intense, purifying. I looked down at my left hand. The platinum band of my wedding ring sat there, heavy and cold. It had felt like a shackle for years, a reminder of a mistake I had made when I was young and lonely enough to believe that a handsome face masked a good heart. I twisted the ring. It slid off easily. My finger felt light, naked, free. I held the ring over the fire. The diamond caught the light of the flames, flashing orange and red. It was beautiful, but it was just carbon, compressed, pressurized coal, just like Grant. I did not hesitate. I did not feel a pang of nostalgia. I did not think about the wedding day or the vows we had spoken. Those vows were broken the moment he looked at another woman. The moment he stole from me. The moment he thought I was weak. I dropped the ring. It fell into the heart of the fire. It sat on a glowing log for a second, keeping its shape. Before the metal began to darken in the intense heat, it would melt. It would deform. It would become a lump of shapeless slag, indistinguishable from the ash. I turned away from the fire. I walked over to the side table where a fresh pot of coffee was waiting, brewed by Alfred. Exactly to my taste. I poured a cup, black, no sugar. I took a sip. It was bitter, hot, and invigorating. I walked to the window and looked out at the estate. The sun was beginning to rise over the Atlantic. The sky was a bruised purple, bleeding into a brilliant, fiery gold. The darkness was retreating. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed David, who had just left the room to execute the stock trades.
David, I said.
Yes, Madam Chairwoman. It is done, I said. Change the encryption keys for the entire server network, revoke all prior security clearances, and send a memo to the board. What should the memo say? Tell them that the merger with Phoenix Corp is effective immediately, I said, watching the first ray of sunlight hit the ocean. Tell them that Vanguardian Dynamics is under new, absolute management, and tell them that anyone who questions my authority can join Mr. Sterling in the unemployment line. Understood, David said. Anything else?
Yes, I said. Order breakfast. I am starving.
I hung up the phone. I stood there for a long moment, watching the new day begin. There was no sadness in me. There was no regret. People talk about forgiveness as a virtue, but sometimes forgiveness is just permission for the wolf to return to the sheep pen. I did not forgive. I removed it. I sanitized. I was not a victim of a tragedy. I was the author of a correction. Grant and Alara were not people to me anymore. They were errors in the code of my life, bugs that I had patched out with extreme prejudice. I took another sip of coffee and smiled. It wasn't the polite smile of a wife. It wasn't the fake smile of a servant. It was the smile of a woman who owns the ground she stands on. I looked back at the empty room, at the fire consuming the last traces of my marriage, and at the clean, polished floor where the mess used to be. Finally, I whispered to the rising sun, the house is finally clean. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal and absolute justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below telling me your country or city, and let's share our thoughts on Mira's revenge. If you enjoyed seeing the villains get exactly what they deserved, please subscribe to the channel Scarlet Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people who need a little satisfaction in their day.